Please support Vlad Nerd. Thank you. My dear nerd, no matter how beautiful you might be on the inside, because let's face it, I don't know if you're beautiful on the outside, you are an anomaly. And I say it in the best way possible because I'm also an anomaly. Let me guess, you're probably the guy in the family or the girl that does tech support for everybody and all the relatives. And that's freaking amazing because I think that we all are that person. We all did this. So as anomalies, we should technically love other anomalies. Well, at least I think so, and this is why I wanted to do this video on the, wait for it, Anbernic RG CubeXX. You see, this beautiful handheld is also an anomaly. Why is it an anomaly, you might ask? Well, the answer to that is quite simple. This is the only Linux Anbernic handheld that I can plainly say is better in terms of bang for the buck, of course, than its way more advanced sibling, the actual RG Cube that runs Android. This actually has a lot of things that were inherited from the RG Cube, which makes it an amazing value for what you actually receive. You see, when the original RG Cube actually released, I was like, what the freaking heck is this? Because a 1x1 screen, aka the one on the RG Cube, is just so awkward on Android. You don't really have a lot of things on Android which can really take advantage of this screen. You can't run a lot of Android games that scale properly, and you can't really take advantage of normal retro games without having black bars on the top or the bottom, or without doing the sinful act of stretching the image to fit. But probably the worst of all when it came to the RG Cube is that it couldn't natively play Pico 8. And in case you don't know, Pico 8 is the reason you would get a 1x1 screen. It's essentially this virtual console that people commonly agreed on when it comes to specs, of course, where people would make modern games which had the retro aesthetic to them, and that made them very nice to play even in modern times. You know, games like Celeste actually had their roots in Pico 8, but on Android you had to do all kinds of shenanigans to enjoy Pico 8. So I always wondered, why did this Android handheld, because at the end of the day this is Android, why was it released with a 1x1 screen? It didn't make sense, but it did make sense on a Linux Android, because Linux, or more rather handhelds that come with a Linux based OS, actually have native Pico 8. And there is a lot of things to this which I feel we need to discuss. But before I do that, I just want to quickly say that this specific, yes, this one, this specific Anbernic RG CubeXX was sent to me by the awesome guys at 2Retro. And in case you don't know about 2Retro, where have you been by now? It's actually a very good store in our retro niche from which you can get handhelds. What makes this store different than other stores in our niche is that the people behind this store, they go above and beyond when it comes to the whole customer satisfaction thing. I should know, I actually bought some stuff from this store under my personal account. Nobody knew I was Vlad Nerd, and each time the experience was amazing. So check them out if you want, but as always, this video isn't seen by anyone, no money exchanged hands, nobody freaking paid me, nobody saw this video beforehand. All thoughts here, my dear nerd, as you should know, are my own. So anyway, back to my point here, just look at how Celeste, a Pico 8 game, looks on this. It looks absolutely freaking amazing. You don't have to worry about stretching to fit, and you don't have to worry about black bars. This is the reason why somebody would get one of these 1x1 aspect ratio screens. but we can run Pico 8 natively because we are on Linux. And that's why I am so happy that Anbernic released this when they did. As a direct comparison with the normal RG Cube, I feel like this is an odd duck of sorts. There are a lot of things about this handheld that are nice, I'm not gonna lie, but you have to be okay with stretching the image or with having black bars. Here, well, this is basically the perfect machine if you want Pico 8. If you want to play retro games, and by retro I mean stuff under PS2, I'm so old that I don't consider PS2 that retro actually, but for retro games and some new stuff like Pico 8, this is an amazing handheld. The experience of playing retro games, I would dare say, is actually better than on the RG Cube, partly because, well, it shares the same ergonomics, as you can see, but it has these digital triggers, which, you know, you might think at first glance, ew, digital, gross, what the heck? I want analog like on the RG Cube. Well, no you don't. I can guarantee that you don't, my dear nerd, and I'm gonna tell you why. You see, most games that are actually retro, they don't take advantage of analog triggers. And as a consequence, when you play, well, retro games on something with analog triggers, you have this very deep push that you need to do in order to actually register. Of course, there are hacks. Some Android versions allow you to register a push when you're, let's say, 20% in, but needless to say, your instinct would be to push this button until you hit the bottom. Whereas this will be very hard to convey, but these shoulder and trigger buttons, they are so freaking comfortable. They feel like you're pressing on marshmallows. I haven't really met this kind of feeling when it comes to shoulder and trigger buttons on an Anbernic device ever, and I think I have most of them. The push though is just soft with a firm bump at the end, and that just gives you very good tactile feedback. And of course, you can't only play just Pico 8, you can actually play a lot of other games on this. Unfortunately though, for other games you get hit with the same aspect ratio limitation that we would have on the RG Cube. You see, on the RG Cube you would have to stretch to fit, like I'm doing over here, basically any NES game or any other retro platform that has a 4:3 aspect ratio. So your choices would be to either use an overlay, like how I have here, in order to actually enjoy the game at its native aspect ratio, or you could do how I prefer and actually go in the settings and disable the overlay, and quickly going in the video settings, scaling, and that's basically it. And now you get to stretch the image to the entire canvas that you have here. Is this the same experience as playing on a native 4:3 screen? Well, of course not, but 1:1 has always, freaking always, been a sacrifice of convenience. You get to play some platforms very well, but you get to sacrifice a bit, especially image quality, on others. Personally, I don't mind stretching. I think stretching is as normal as, well, as using rewind. No, you get better at games if you use the rewind functionality in order to not lose. You should try it. I can already feel the torches and pitchforks that are headed towards me after this statement. You might have noticed though that I'm on the stock operating system here, and this is actually for a reason when it comes to the RG Cube. You see, the RG Cube has this new fancy stock OS update that Anbernic did when it introduced this, well, newer version of the UI. And this has a very interesting functionality, one that you can't really emulate yet on custom firmwares like MoOS or Nuli or any other, and that is actual good standby. My main complaint about handhelds like these was that they never had good standby time. The standby was usually a fake kind of sleep, which would take a lot of battery per hour, and that resulted in basically having your battery drained if you pushed the button and forgot about this for a day or two. You would basically come back to a drained, empty handheld. And nothing is more annoying than thinking, oh my god, I have a bit of free time, I'm gonna play some retro games, and then you realize you have to charge the battery for 2 hours. Nothing is more of a party pooper than that feeling. So that's why I'm keeping this one on stock. But don't get me wrong, there are things on the RG CubeXX which are objectively way worse than on its way more expensive older brother, the RG Cube. First of all, it's this freaking plastic bezel at the bottom. You know, if you know me by now, I hate screen bezels. I hate when companies do this double bezel shenanigan, but I am willing to forgive companies when they do the thin plastic bezel. Just like we have here on the RG Cube, you see, we still have double bezels, but they are symmetrical, and the plastic one is very thin, and as a result you feel like you have a full screen kind of experience here. I actually think this is a way better compromise when it comes to a full screen display than what we have even on the Retroid Pocket 5, where we have a whole glass front. I really hope Anbernic and other companies, they don't jump on the all glass bandwagon, because that's not good for handheld sustainability. That makes people break their handhelds just way faster. But the Anbernic RG CubeXX being a cheaper handheld, it's actually more than 2 times cheaper than this other one, has a more budget solution going on, where the ribbon cable of the display is actually in this bottom chin. Is it horrible? Well, not really, but you can see that this makes the handheld just a tad bigger. Let me use this as sort of point of reference. You see, it's just a tad bigger. The equivalent of this chin is the equivalent of how much taller the CubeXX is than the original Cube. But anyway, in case you didn't know about the RG CubeXX yet, let me give you a brief rundown. It can basically play a whole ton of handhelds. When it comes to Nintendo DS, the 1x1 screen actually plays in our favor, because we can stack the virtual displays on top of the other. This wouldn't play as well with a 4x3 screen than what we have here. And granted, this isn't an ideal solution, because we still have these 2 freaking big overlays, and I haven't found a way to stretch to fit the image. But this is an enjoyable method, an enjoyable way to actually consume Nintendo DS games if you're into this platform. Most other games though, they play exactly as you would expect. Here's me playing with some very stretched PS1 Hercules, and I and I really love this experience. It's actually good, you should try stretching to fit. You know, nothing wrong, join the dark side, my dear nerd. Enjoy the full canvas of the screen. And look how much taller Hercules looks. I'm not gonna lie, he sort of looks like Jason Momoa a bit here. He's pretty tall, and of course he never skipped leg day. If you look at these legs, they are very worked out. Yeah, you can enjoy basically most retro games on this thing, while having the same exact superior ergonomics that we found on its Android older brother. Of course, there's some things missing as well. You won't have active cooling, but on the H700 chip inside this one, I would argue that you don't even need it. PSP is sort of the maximum of what this handheld can do, and a lot of games play well, others are just at the brink. Look, for example, Need for Speed Pro Street here dips to up to 26 frames per second instead of 30, and my god, the controls on this game, they really weren't the best. It's like I'm piloting a freaking boat here. But you get the idea. Performance, however, is the main argument where you might actually want to choose the RG Cube versus the CubeXX. Performance is everything when you want to emulate higher consoles, like everything above the PSP really. This is sort of the Achilles heel of more budget Linux handhelds, the performance. Look, on the RG Cube, you have more or less flawless PSP performance, especially, again, especially if you like to stretch to fit. Whereas on the RG CubeXX, you can still play the game, but you kind of have to go in the settings, you kind of have to milk it for performance. You just can't go with the default settings, you can't increase the internal resolution and just call it a day. You see, now I turned frame skip on, and while this is sort of playable, I'm really fast and loose with the term playable right now, but I don't want you to think that this is representative of all PSP games. I actually picked one of the hardest to emulate here to illustrate my point. So, if you crave performance, there's still a place for the RG Cube, especially if you want performance in a 1:1 aspect ratio. So just to drive the point home, is it worth getting the RG CubeXX in 2025? Well, that depends on you, my dear nerd. I would say yeah, especially if you want a 1:1 aspect ratio screen, because, and I don't want this to have any room for interpretation, the RG CubeXX is better than any 1:1 budget handheld solution that we have out there. It's better than the Powkiddy RGB30, it's better than the Powkiddy RGB20SX, it's better than all of them. There's simply no contest between them. This is better in terms of quality, ergonomics, you name it. Now the main lingering question is it better than the actual RG Cube? Well, of course not, especially if we are to compare performance and screen quality. Well, it's not a fair fight, but remember the price difference. This is less than half of this, and what you get for less than half the price of the RG Cube is more than worth it, because more than 80% of the emulation potential of the Cube is present in the CubeXX. And if you do the math of these numbers that I just made up, but through sheer approximation, I think it's pretty close, then value for money, the CubeXX is way better than the original Cube. Again, I want to mention it's not a better handheld, especially in terms of performance and screen, but it is a better handheld in terms of value per money, and it beats the rest of the 1:1 aspect ratio handhelds totally out of the water. So this is my rant in 2025 on the RG CubeXX. I actually plan on revisiting quite a few other handheld models in 2025 because I truly think when it comes to emulation, we kind of hit a peak here. Of course, we can't play GameCube on the Linux budget handhelds, and we can't play PS2, but I don't think we will be able to do that in 2025 either. Of course, Anbernic might come with a way better SoC for 2025, but when it comes to these specific platforms, the 8-bit, 16-bit ones, the early 3D consoles, you don't need more performance than that. So my dear nerd, my main point here is that this is more than enough, especially if you are to focus on what I would call the macro features of a handheld, mainly the build quality, the design, the ergonomics, and the screen. And of course the sticks, but the sticks are really nothing to write home about. So if all of these features are something that you want in a handheld, of course you can get it, even if it's 2025. And in case you want to get it, or if you want to get an RG Cube instead, you'll have links to both of them from 2Retro in the video description. But anyway, my dear nerds, my mouth is freaking dry by this point, so see you in the next video. I love you very much. This will never change. I hope you know that.